In the space of just one critical day, Ronald Skirth would be transformed from an ardent believer in the cause to a conscientious objector. In June 1917, his battery took up position south of Ypres in preparation for a massive artillery assault on the heavily fortified German defences at Messines Ridge. This is Lone Tree Crater, on what was then the German front line. Today, locals call it the Pool of Peace. But you wouldn't have wanted to be here early in the morning of 7th of June 1917. At 3:10 a.m, British sappers detonated 91,000 pounds of high explosive from a tunnel running directly under my feet. It was one of 19 simultaneous explosions under German positions along a 7-mile front. It was huge, and when the whole thing went up, you could hear it back in London, over 100 miles away. The scale of the craters was staggering. In just a few seconds, the Germans suffered 10,000 casualties. But this was just the beginning. For the next 14 hours, British shells thundered into the German positions. Only at 5:30 p.m. did Ronald Skirth's guns finally fall silent, with the capture of Messines Ridge. I've got here an Australian aerial reconnaissance photograph taken at 6 p.m. on the 7th of June, and you can see the smoke just beginning to clear over the German lines, which have been battered. And no man's land is devastated. It's all tree stumps and craters. On the ground, it must have been carnage. After the barrage, Ronald Skirth was sent into no man's land on a reconnaissance mission. It would be his first encounter with death. He later wrote, "It was a ghastly sight which met our eyes. I can't attempt to describe what shapes and colours human bodies assume after they've been blown sky high. Some looked like bluish-green replicas of the Michelin tire men. Others were incomplete. The young man, whose head had been filled with images of a barbaric, murderous enemy, was simply overwhelmed by the scale of death and suffering around him." Skirth came across a young German boy sitting down on the battlefield. He was dead, but he looked merely asleep. He had no visible wounds, and Skirth thought he looked just like himself, but in a different uniform. He was carrying a photograph of a young girl who looked exactly like Ella. She'd written in the corner of the photo, "Mein Hans." The 19-year-old Skirth said that he felt sick with shame. The sight of Hans and the thought of his distant, grieving girlfriend left Ronald with a permanently troubled conscience.
He found a picture of a young woman and it seemed to remind him of Ella, at the same sort of age, you know. I think she'd written Mein Hans, yes, obviously very fond of this boy, I think.
So it's a love story like theirs.
Like theirs. Could have been there. It could have been him in the shell hole.
And did that change his attitude to the Germans?
I guess maybe he could then see that they were just people, you know, people, whichever nationality, it was wrong. The whole idea of killing people was wrong.
For the rest of the war, Ronald Skirth considered himself a fraud, secretly containing his moral turmoil. He tried and failed to get a transfer into an ambulance unit. He refused to accept the military medal, and he turned down a commission as an officer, as he did not wish to give men orders to kill. This is the Langemark German cemetery. It contains the remains of more than 44,000 German soldiers killed at Ypres. If the body of Hans was ever recovered, it is likely to rest somewhere here.
Skirth decided he couldn't tell anyone about his conscientious objection. Not his family, not his fiancée, not his fellow soldiers, who might have branded him a coward or a traitor. So he made a private pact with God. He would stay in the army, but he would put no more young Hanses into the ground.
So strong was Skirth's conviction that he even claims to have performed acts of military sabotage. Acts that, if discovered, would undoubtedly have been considered treasonable. In his memoir, he records that he deliberately missed targets with his first salvo of shells, to give the enemy a chance to flee before the next barrage closed in.
He says, "I got great comfort from all this, feeling a sense of power that nothing else gave me." It's quite an extraordinary admission, and it's not a comfortable one to read. Yes, he's preserving the life of the enemy, but is he in some way endangering the life of his own troops? He writes, "I felt no sense of guilt whatever."
Ronald Skirth kept his conscientious objection secret, even from his wife Ella. He didn't tell her until he began writing his memoir some 50 years later. But some men decided to make their protests public, risking the wrath of their communities, their fellow soldiers, and their families. This is the British Library newspaper archive in Colindale, North London. It holds an original copy of a First World War newspaper published by conscientious objectors. It was called The Tribunal. This is an article dated Thursday, October the 3rd, 1918, and its contents are extraordinary. 2 serving officers, brothers, Captain J. Hunter and Second Lieutenant A. Hunter, tried simultaneously to resign their commissions on the grounds of conscientious objection. That was an ambitious plan, to put it mildly. You didn't just leave the war because you'd thought better of it. All honour to the 2 brothers, says the tribunal. But what actually happened to them? John and Arthur Hunter were born on the 11th of October 1890. They were identical, part of a set of triplets with a brother, Morris. They and their elder sister Agnes grew up in a military family in the mill town of Belper in Derbyshire. I've come to Belper to meet local historian Charles Beresford to find out more about the family.
Right, well, I've been doing some digging, and I've come across some photos of the Hunter family, and that's one that I think will interest you. That is Lieutenant Colonel Morris Hunter, the father of the John and Arthur that you're interested in.
What a severe-looking photograph.
Absolutely.
Full moustache.
Full moustache, that's right. And for most of the war, he was involved with training in the 5th Sherwood Foresters. He was actually awarded the OBE for his services.
Oh, really?
So, yes,
He was a very serious figure.
He was a very serious figure.
Lieutenant Colonel Morris Hunter had never seen action. At the outbreak of war, he urged his 3 sons to sign up. John Hunter was the first to join the fight. He served with the British Expeditionary Force and was among the first soldiers into France. Hunter took a camera with him. His own pictures capture the confident mood among his fellow Sherwood Foresters. But that soon changed. In 1915, John Hunter was transferred to Ypres, where the battalion suffered heavy casualties. Back in Belper, the local paper carried a testimony to his leadership.
I want to show you an article that appeared in the Belper News in September 1915. Can you just read it? Sorry.
Yeah, Captain Hunter, who was a very capable officer and intensely liked by all the men.
Yeah.
Not the sort of man you would expect to develop a conscientious objection from nowhere.
Absolutely. No indication from that whatsoever. That's right. He's just a bloody good infantry officer, doing his duty and doing it very well.
Captain Hunter led his men for 2 more harrowing years. We don't know precisely when he developed his conscientious objection, but seeing so many men killed and wounded clearly began to take its toll.